Sanctuaries are sentimental things. People want to see certain things when they walk into a sanctuary. They have certain expectations. The baptismal font that's been in use for years, where generations of people are baptized, the stained glass windows that are often donated in memory of different people, the structure of the front of the sanctuary. You've got your flower arrangements, your flags, your chairs, your pulpit, and the communion table. All of these are really important things. But to a lot of people, there's something that's even more important. And that's the traditional music that's actually used inside of the sanctuary. For example, there are some churches who prefer to have everything played on the piano. And if you deviate from that by using a guitar or a drum set or things like that, people tend to get more than a little bit offended. It cracks me up that they use words like contemporary to describe music that was written in the 1970s, but they do. Or if you look into an older church like this one that was actually built in the early 1900s, I think it's a 100-year-old sanctuary now, there's something that's even more important than that big, grand piano, and that's the pipe organ. You know, music is always a part of worship, and it's always an important part of who we are. I joke all the time that it's easier for a church to replace a pastor than it is to replace a musician. For starters, we tend to replace pastors a lot more often. But in this church, a long time ago, there was a musician that served this church for a long time. He led worship, he played that organ, and he also loved music and taught music in the local schools. There are a lot of people in this county that really owe their love of music to him, and he passed away a few years ago. Now we run into a conundrum. His widow, who I count among my friends, gave me a gift when I was at his house not too long ago because she knew that I played guitar and I liked to work on them. She gave me this. This was one of his that was stored away in a closet. I don't know anything about the brand. I don't know anything about the quality. But what I do know is that right now, I can feel the resonance of my voice echoing through the body and moving up through the neck. Now, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be playing music in worship in this church. I play the last Sunday of the month. And the question is, can I, in a short period of time, get this guitar playable? This week, it's a special edition because we're going to be working with Bob Gourley's guitar.
Rob Cass, number 39. Bob Gourley's guitar. Before I even started to break down the guitar, I had to find out a little bit more about it. I was able to find out that it was manufactured in the 1960s, and it was sold under the name of K, and the model is called a True Tone. They consider this to be a sunburst, and while it has a steel-reinforced neck, it's not technically a truss rod. Now, the good news is that means I can't go yanking on it and snap the neck. The bad news is it means that I pretty much have to live with the height of the strings where they are. I'm actually fortunate that they didn't leave it completely strung. That would have caused too much tension. Now is where the first big difference between this guitar and my acoustics comes in. The bridge is a floating bridge. It's not permanently attached. And the tailpiece is just held in place by one screw. Now that's going to mean later on I'm actually going to have to do math when I restring this thing because the bridge has to be in a very precise location, otherwise the intonation of the instrument is going to be completely off. Another difference is I'm working with an older instrument, and so instead of just using the braces to cover up the wood with the frets when I use the steel wool, I actually mask off the entire neck with painter's tape. That way I can clean the frets and then I go back and clean the inlays. They feel like plastic, and I know that they clean up relatively easy with just some steel wool. The tuning pegs are different. I decide to use a fine sandpaper on those and lightly clean off the residue. Just trying to clean them with some basic solution and a soft cloth wasn't cutting it. While I'm there, I go ahead and tighten up the screws on the tuning gears. That'll help keep the guitar in tune a little longer. This is one of those ideas you find out about on the internet and wonder if hydrogen peroxide will actually be a decent cleaner for the silver parts. I'm not real sure how it cleaned, but at least it didn't do any damage. This time, instead of just conditioning the neck, I decide I'm going to condition the whole guitar. And the funny thing is, it gets kind of squeaky. I don't know if you ever watched the Dukes of Hazzard when you were a kid, but this is the part where the balladeer, Waylon Jennings to you and me, would say something to the effect of, "Now y'all without sin, cast the first stone." There's a rough edge on this guitar, which pretty much makes it impossible to play. And so I sand that edge down and then use regular Elmer's glue inserted in the crease to try to see if I can reattach it. That way, at least it's playable. I know this is not what you're supposed to do, but given the limited time and limited resources that I have, basically that's what I had to do. I tried to be as gentle as possible. I'm not a luthier, nor do I have access to one. And I'm not entirely sure that it wouldn't cost more than the guitar's value. But at this point, the value of the guitar continues to increase. As a last-ditch effort, I decide to take some of the butcher block conditioner that I use for other guitars and treat a spot close to where I've had to do my redneck repair. Then it's back to the soaking parts with the toothbrush and the hydrogen peroxide to see if maybe I can get it to shine up. My car guy friends talk to me about patina and how that makes old cars look cool. Well, this tailpiece is going to look really cool. But a funny thing happens just about the time I'm ready to give up hope. The butcher block conditioner works wonders. It makes a huge difference in the way that the back of the guitar looks. And so I decide, let's just go ahead and treat all the exposed area that I can see. I typically use this stuff in order to keep friction to a minimum over bridge saddles and things. But the moisture seems to be reinvigorating the wood without warping it or causing any difficulty. It is primarily mineral spirits that are meant to be used to condition butcher blocks in kitchens. It's at this point I realize that I've got to stop thinking of this as a guitar that was mass-produced on a CNC machine. Regardless of where this thing came from, it was made by hand, and it is a piece of wood. It's not just wood cobbled together. Remember how I talked about an increase of value? Well, this is where I reminded myself this was a musician's instrument. It may have ended up in a closet, but at one point it was used to communicate in a language that is beyond words. And now you can really see the difference of where that conditioner was used and where it wasn't. It's starting to come back to life. When I started this whole thing, I really wondered if it was possible to bring this thing back into playable shape. Now I'm wondering if it's not only going to be playable, but it may very well be wall-worthy. After I use it in worship, it may be something that I can return to the family, and they might appreciate it, as opposed to just being something that was found and kind of handed off. Maybe it can be returned to a child or a grandchild, a member of the family. It's starting to look very different than it did when it was first handed to me. But now it's time to go ahead and condition the top as well. And you can see the change taking place almost immediately as moisture soaks back into the wood. It looks so good, I go ahead and decide to redo the headstock. At this point, I realize I gotta quit making fun of people for meditation, because this, for me, is very, very much the same thing. But the main difference is, at the end, I'm not trying to stay awake. I actually have something that I can put my hands on and see a tangible result and a change in. I still believe firmly that as these things are changed, I am changed, and we're both improved. Of course, maybe that's just me justifying all this. Thinking about this kind of stuff, though, is just kind of what I do. Now it's time for me to start reassembling the guitar. Remember me mentioning math? Well, the bridge has to be located precisely the exact length away from the 12th fret that the nut at the top of the neck is from the 12th fret. So I have to measure one, then measure another, and then I put a post-it to mark the spot. The consequence of getting it wrong? Having to take all the strings off and start over again, because it will not stay in tune. To hold the bridge in place, I decide that I'm just going to string the 1st and the 6th strings. That'll hold the bridge in place while I put the other strings on it. I can't remember where I picked that up. Maybe another instrument with a mobile bridge like a violin or banjo or something. It's reasonable to assume that I learned it from a girl. Now, after getting the other 4 strings on it, I break the high E string. That's determined not to give up easy. And now my main work is done. It's just a matter of getting it tuned up. And since I've changed the format, and since you've been patient,
Bob Gourley's guitar.